To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Michael Garrett had built his life like the highways his trucking company maintained, solid, dependable, with multiple routes to every destination. At 42, he owned Garrett Logistics, a mid-sized transportation firm that moved everything from medical supplies to construction materials across 3 states. His calloused hands and weathered face told the story of a man who'd started with a single truck and a dream, working 18-hour days until he could afford a second vehicle, then a third. The house on Maple Street reflected his success, a 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn that his wife Linda insisted upon. Linda, 38, had been the office manager at a dental practice when they met 15 years ago. She'd been charming then, with her auburn hair and easy laugh, though Michael noticed how that laugh had grown sharper over the years, especially when discussing money or their daughter Amy's college plans. Amy, their 17-year-old, had inherited her mother's sharp features and tongue. Once Daddy's little girl who'd ride shotgun in his big rigs during summer breaks, she'd transformed into a stranger who rolled her eyes at his blue-collar stories and asked when he'd upgrade to something more respectable than trucking. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in October. Michael was inspecting a delayed shipment at the warehouse when a drunk driver ran a red light, T-boning his pickup truck. The impact sent him through the windshield, leaving him with 3 broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, internal bleeding, and a concussion that kept him unconscious for 2 days. When he awoke in Mercy General Hospital, the first thing he noticed was the empty chair beside his bed. The second was the silence of his phone. Linda hadn't visited, hadn't called the hospital directly. His brother Tony had been the one to find him, arriving at the hospital after Michael's foreman called when the boss didn't show up for work. "Where's Linda?" Michael asked through painkillers and bandages. Tony's expression tightened. She said she'd come by later. She's busy with something." But later never came. Days passed in a haze of nurses checking vitals, doctors explaining recovery timelines, and the steady realization that his family had simply vanished. The insurance paperwork piled up, the bills arrived, and still, nothing. Michael wasn't a man who begged or pleaded. 25 years of running a business had taught him to read people, to spot lies and half-truths. When Linda finally answered his calls on day 4, her voice carried something he'd never heard before: relief. Not concern, not worry. Relief. "How are you feeling?" she asked, but the question felt rehearsed. "When are you coming to see me?" A pause. "The hospital is just so depressing, Michael. And Amy has that college interview next week. I'm busy getting her ready." "I've been here 4 days, Linda." "Well, you're getting good care. That's what insurance is for, right?" The conversation lasted 3 more minutes. She asked about his prognosis, seemed pleased when he mentioned he'd be there for weeks, and hung up quickly when a nurse entered his room. Michael stared at the phone, a cold certainty settling in his chest like the steel plates holding his ribs together. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He'd survived because he paid attention to details: which drivers drank, which clients paid late, which routes had the most dangerous intersections. That same instinct now screamed warnings. Linda's relief. Amy's complete absence. The way Tony wouldn't meet his eyes when discussing home. That night, unable to sleep despite the morphine, Michael replayed their last month together. Linda's new interest in her appearance. Her sudden enthusiasm for girls' nights out, with coworkers he'd never met. The way she'd started password protecting her phone. The arguments about money that seemed designed to push him away rather than resolve anything. By dawn, Michael had reached a conclusion that felt like swallowing broken glass. His wife was having an affair. And worse, she was using his hospitalization as an opportunity to be with someone else. Maybe even planning her exit from their marriage while he lay broken and helpless. But Michael Garrett hadn't built a successful business by accepting defeat. He'd built it by outworking, outthinking, and when necessary, destroying his competition. As he watched the sunrise through his hospital window, a new kind of pain settled in his chest. One that had nothing to do with broken bones and everything to do with broken trust. He reached for his phone and called Tony. "I need you to do something for me," Michael said when his brother answered. "And I need you to do it without asking questions." Chapter 2. The Truth Burns. The call came on his 8th day in the hospital. Michael had been expecting it, had prepared himself for it, but the words still hit like a physical blow. "You're not worth the parking fee." Linda's voice crackled through the hospital phone, sharp with an anger that seemed more about inconvenience than concern. "Get better quick or just die already." Before he could respond, he heard Amy's voice in the background, then closer as she apparently took the phone. "We're happier without you anyway." The line went dead. Michael set the phone down carefully, his hands surprisingly steady. A nurse bustled in to check his chattering about his improving blood work, but her words sounded like they were coming from underwater. 20 years of marriage. 17 years of fatherhood. Reduced to a parking fee. The morphine couldn't touch this kind of pain. 20 minutes later, Tony arrived with a manila envelope and an expression that mixed fury with pity. Michael's younger brother had always been the emotional one, quick to anger and quick to forgive. Today, he looked like he wanted to burn something down. "You sure you want to see these?" Tony asked, sitting heavily in the bedside chair. "Show me." The photographs told the story Michael's instincts had already written. Linda entering a downtown apartment building. Linda leaving the same building the next morning, wearing yesterday's clothes. Linda kissing a man in the parking lot. A tall, lean guy with perfect hair and expensive clothes who looked like he'd never worked a day with his hands. "His name's Derek Morrison," Tony said quietly. "Works at some marketing firm downtown. Drives a BMW, rents that fancy apartment in Riverside Commons. Never been married, no kids." Michael studied the photos with the same analytical attention he'd once given to traffic patterns and delivery schedules. "How long?" "Best I can tell. About 6 months. Maybe longer." The timeline fit. Linda's new gym membership. Her complaints about feeling trapped in suburbia. Her sudden interest in downtown restaurants and art galleries. Places she'd always scorned as pretentious. "There's more," Tony said, pulling out his phone. "I set up that tracking app on your truck's GPS that you asked for. Wanted to see where she was going while you've been in here." The screen showed a map with colored lines indicating routes and stops. Michael's truck, the one Linda had been driving since her sedan was in the shop, had made daily trips to Riverside Commons. But more damning were the other locations: a jewelry store, a real estate office, and most recently, a divorce attorney's office. "She met with Lawrence and Associates yesterday," Tony said. "Spent 2 hours there." Michael handed back the phone. Lawrence and Associates specialized in high-asset divorces, particularly ones where they helped clients hide money from their spouses. He'd hauled materials for one of their clients' construction projects years ago and remembered the partner bragging about their creative approaches to property division. "She's planning to take everything," Michael said. It wasn't a question. "Looks like it. And Mike, there's something else. I did some checking on this Derek guy. He's got gambling debts. Big ones. Word is he owes some serious money to people who don't accept payment plans." The picture crystallized. Linda wasn't just cheating, she was being used. Derek needed money, and Michael's successful business looked like a solution. A divorce would give Linda half of everything, which she could then share with her lover to pay off his debts. Maybe they'd even counted on Michael not surviving the accident, making Linda a wealthy widow instead of just another divorcee. "The truck registration," Michael said suddenly. "It's in both our names, right?" "Yeah, but what does that?" Tony stopped as understanding dawned. "Oh, she's been driving my truck to meet her lover. That makes her guilty of unauthorized use of a vehicle, since she's not insured as the primary driver and she's using it for activities outside the scope of our marriage." "Mike, you're not thinking clearly." "The pain meds. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months." Michael pushed himself up straighter in bed, ignoring the fire in his ribs. 20 years I built this business. 20 years I provided for them, protected them, made sure they never wanted for anything. And the moment I can't work, the moment I'm vulnerable, this is what they do." Tony leaned forward. "What are you planning?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, thinking about chess games with his father, who taught him that the best moves were the ones your opponent never saw coming. "I'm planning to remind them that I didn't get where I am by being nice. I got here by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than the competition." "And Linda? Amy?" "They made their choice." Michael's voice carried the finality of a judge passing sentence. "They chose to betray me when I was helpless. They chose to mock my condition, to celebrate my absence. They chose to steal from me while I was bleeding in a hospital bed." He looked at the photos again, then at his brother. "I need you to make some calls. Start with Jerry Morrison at the freight yard. Tell him I'll need some of his off-the-books services. Then call Maria Santos at the detective agency. I want to know everything about Derek Morrison, his debts, his habits, his weaknesses. Everything." "Mike, you can't." "I can. I will." Michael's eyes held the cold calculation that had helped him outbid larger companies and survive economic downturns. "They want me to die? They think I'm worth less than a parking fee? They're about to learn exactly what I'm worth. And more importantly, they're about to learn what it costs to betray me." Outside his window, the October sky was gray and threatening rain. Michael smiled for the first time since the accident. Storm season was coming. Chapter 3: The Phoenix Rises. 3 weeks after the phone call that shattered his world, Michael Garrett walked out of Mercy General Hospital on a Tuesday morning. Carrying nothing but a small bag of personal effects and a discharge sheet he immediately threw in the trash. The doctors had wanted him to stay another week, but Michael had insisted he was ready. What they didn't understand was that his healing had moved beyond the physical. He didn't call a taxi or ask Tony for a ride. Instead, he walked 6 blocks to Budget Car Rental and paid cash for a generic sedan under the name of his business corporation. A perfectly legal transaction that would be harder to trace than a personal rental. 25 years of running a logistics company had taught him the value of moving quietly when necessary. The house on Maple Street looked exactly the same from the outside, but Michael could feel the difference as he turned into the driveway. Linda's car was gone, probably at Derek's apartment, based on the surveillance reports Tony had been feeding him. Amy would be at school, though recent reports suggested she'd been skipping classes to spend time with a college boy from the community college. Michael let himself in through the front door, using keys that Linda hadn't thought to change. Why would she? As far as she knew, he was still bedridden and helpless, probably unaware of her betrayal. The house smelled different. Unfamiliar cologne mixed with cigarettes, neither of which had ever been present before. In the living room, he found evidence of Derek's presence everywhere. Expensive wine bottles, a designer jacket draped over Michael's favorite chair, even a spare phone charger plugged into the wall. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. More telling was what wasn't there: Michael's framed photos from the mantel, his books, his reading glasses. Someone had been systematically erasing him from his own home. He climbed the stairs to their bedroom, each step sending reminders through his healing ribs. The master bedroom told an even clearer story. The bed was unmade, with sheets that Linda had bought recently. Michael recognized the Egyptian cotton set she'd been admiring at Macy's. His side of the closet had been cleared out, his clothes obviously packed away somewhere. On what had been his nightstand sat Derek's watch, wallet, and a small velvet jewelry box. Michael opened the box. Inside was a diamond engagement ring, expensive, flashy, nothing like the simple gold band he'd given Linda 20 years ago. A ring meant for a proposal that would come after the divorce papers were signed and the assets divided. He pocketed the ring. The Home Office revealed the most damning evidence. Linda had clearly been going through his business files, probably providing Derek with information about assets, accounts, and property holdings. Photocopies of tax returns and business contracts were scattered across the desk, along with handwritten notes in Linda's careful script. Warehouse property, $2.3 million. Business account balances, truck fleet value. But Linda had made a crucial mistake. She'd focused on the obvious assets, the property, the vehicles, the main business accounts. She'd missed the complexity of how Michael had actually structured his empire. The holding companies, the offshore accounts, the property held in corporate names, the investments made through shell companies. She saw the surface and thought she understood the depths. Michael spent an hour making phone calls from his office, speaking quietly to accountants, lawyers, and business partners. By the time he finished, several critical changes had been made. Business assets had been shifted between corporate entities, insurance beneficiaries had been updated, and account access permissions had been modified. All legal, all documented, all designed to protect what he'd built from those who would steal it. The last call was to his old friend Marcus, who owned a construction company and owed Michael several favors from over the years. "I need a moving crew," Michael said. "Today?" "And Marcus?" "This one needs to be fast and quiet." By the time Amy returned from school, the house was empty. Not just of Michael's belongings, but of everything valuable: furniture, appliances, electronics, jewelry, artwork. even the expensive wine Derek had left behind. The movers had been professional and thorough, leaving only the basic fixtures and Linda's personal clothing. Amy's scream could probably be heard 3 houses away. Michael watched from his rental car parked down the street as his daughter ran through the empty rooms, her phone pressed to her ear, undoubtedly calling her mother. 20 minutes later, Linda's car screeched into the driveway, followed by Derek's BMW. Through his binoculars, Michael watched Linda run into the house, then emerge moments later, her face twisted with rage and panic. She was screaming at Derek, who kept shaking his head and pointing at his phone, probably trying to call the police, lawyers, anyone who might help. But there was nothing illegal about what Michael had done. He'd removed his own possessions from his own house using his own moving company. The furniture they'd bought together was technically owned by their joint account, which was technically controlled by the primary breadwinner. The expensive items Derek had brought over were just gone, probably just collateral damage in the moving process. Linda's scream reached him even through the closed car windows. OMG. He took everything, even the dog. Rex, their golden retriever, was indeed gone, rescued from people who'd planned to abandon him when they moved in with Derek. The dog was currently at Tony's house, probably enjoying his first real meal in weeks based on how thin he'd looked. Michael started the car and drove away, leaving them to discover the rest of his surprise. The utilities would be disconnected tomorrow. The accounts had been in his name and his business credit. The mortgage payments would stop, also his responsibility, though Linda would discover that he'd already begun foreclosure proceedings through his lawyer. Most importantly, she'd soon realize that the joint accounts she'd been planning to claim were now empty, their contents legally transferred to business accounts she couldn't touch. His phone buzzed with the first of what would surely be many angry calls and texts. He turned it off and drove toward the extended stay hotel where he'd rented a suite for the next month. Linda and Derek could scream at an empty house. They could call lawyers who would explain that Michael had committed no crimes. They could face the reality that their victim had been far from helpless. In the hotel parking lot, Michael allowed himself a smile. Phase 1 was complete. Linda and Derek had lost their comfortable nest and their easy target. Now came the hard part, teaching them that betrayal carried a price that couldn't be calculated in parking fees. Tomorrow, he would begin Phase 2. Chapter 4, The Hunter's Web. The private investigator Maria Santos had worked with Michael before, tracking down deadbeat clients and investigating insurance fraud for his trucking company. She was a small, fierce woman who'd retired from the police force after 15 years and had no patience for people who thought they were smarter than they actually were. "Your wife's boyfriend is an idiot," she said, spreading photos across the table in the back booth of Donnelly's diner. "He thinks he's playing sophisticated games, but he's leaving a trail a blind man could follow." Michael studied the surveillance photos while sipping black coffee. Derek Morrison at a poker game in the back room of O'Malley's bar. Derek meeting with a man who looked like he could bench press a car. Derek nervously checking his phone outside a payday loan office. "The gambling debts are worse than we thought," Maria continued. "He owes Mickey Torino about 60 grand, and Mickey's not known for his patience. Word is Derek's been promising a big payday soon. Something about a business deal that would solve all his problems. My wife. Your soon-to-be ex-wife's divorce settlement, yeah? But here's where it gets interesting." Maria pulled out another photo, this one showing Derek and Linda at an expensive restaurant. She doesn't know about the debts. He's been telling her he's some kind of successful marketing executive, but the truth is he got fired 3 months ago for stealing client funds. Been living off credit cards and con games since then. Michael felt a cold satisfaction. She picked a loser. Gets better. I did some digging into their communications. Maria handed him a tablet showing text message screenshots. "Your wife's been sending him information about your business assets, but she's also been talking about post-divorce plans. Apparently, they want to move to Florida and start some kind of boutique hotel business." The texts were damning. Linda describing Michael's properties, his business accounts, even speculating about life insurance payouts. Derek responding with increasing pressure for her to speed up the divorce process. Most revealing were Linda's complaints about Amy's resistance to the divorce and her suggestions that their daughter was just as useless as her father. "There's something else," Maria said, her voice dropping. "Derek's been asking around about accidents. Specifically, about how to make accidents look more permanent." Michael looked up sharply. "He's planning to kill me?" Can't prove it, but he's been asking questions about your recovery, your hospital schedule, your daily routines. And he's been spending time with some rough people, the kind who solve problems with violence instead of lawyers. The revelation shifted something fundamental in Michael's mind. This wasn't just adultery and greed anymore. They'd moved beyond betrayal into actual threats against his life. Linda might not be actively plotting murder, but she'd chosen a partner who was considering it, and she'd provided him with the information he'd need to make it happen. I need everything you can get me on Derek's associates, Michael said. Names, addresses, criminal records, debts, family members. Everything. Planning something specific? Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking about the difference between business competition and war. Derek Morrison wants to play with killers and criminals. I'm going to give him exactly what he's asking for. Over the next week, Michael put together a plan that would have impressed the logistics coordinators he employed to move freight across the country. It required precise timing, careful coordination, and the kind of ruthless efficiency that had built his business empire. The first phase involved Derek's gambling debts. Michael arranged to purchase those debts from Mickey Torino at a substantial premium, using one of his shell companies to mask the transaction. Suddenly, Derek owed money to people connected to Michael instead of to Mickey, though Derek wouldn't know that until much later. The second phase targeted Derek's criminal associations. Maria had identified 3 men Derek had been talking to about accident arrangements. All 3 had outstanding warrants, unpaid debts, or parole violations that Michael's security contacts could easily expose to the appropriate authorities. Within days, Derek's potential murder conspirators were either arrested or too busy running from their own problems to help him. The third phase was more personal. Michael had always prided himself on knowing his competition, understanding their weaknesses, and exploiting those weaknesses without mercy. Derek's greatest weakness wasn't his debts or his criminal stupidity. It was his vanity. He genuinely believed he was smarter than everyone around him, including the dumb trucker whose wife he was stealing. Michael decided to prove him wrong. He arranged for a business opportunity to come Derek's way, a consulting contract with a shipping company that needed marketing help. The company was real, the contract was legitimate, and the pay was exactly what Derek needed to make payments on his debts. There was just one condition. Derek would need to handle some of the marketing logistics personally, visiting various warehouse locations and freight yards to understand the business. Derek took the bait eagerly, seeing it as proof of his superior intelligence and business acumen. He had no way of knowing that every warehouse, every freight yard, and every business contact he'd be working with belonged to Michael or owed Michael favors. By the end of the week, Derek Morrison had unknowingly placed himself entirely within Michael Garrett's power. His debts were owned by Michael's associates, his criminal contacts had been neutralized, and his new job required him to walk into Michael's territory every day. Linda, meanwhile, had discovered that the divorce proceedings were going to be much more complicated than she'd anticipated. The business assets she'd been counting on were tied up in corporate structures she couldn't understand. The house was in foreclosure. The joint accounts were empty. Her own bank accounts had been frozen pending investigation of unauthorized vehicle use. Apparently, using someone else's truck to conduct an affair could be considered theft of services. As Michael reviewed the week's progress from his hotel room, he felt the satisfaction of a chess player who'd moved his pieces into perfect position. Derek and Linda had betrayed him when they thought he was helpless. They'd mocked his condition, dismissed his worth, and planned to profit from his misfortune. Now they were about to learn the difference between being beaten and being destroyed. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Derek Morrison arrived at the Riverside Industrial Complex on a gray Monday morning, dressed in his best suit and carrying a leather briefcase that had cost him his last credit card limit. The shipping company had requested a tour of their facilities, and Derek saw it as his chance to prove his value as a marketing consultant. What he didn't see were the 3 men watching him from the office window above the loading dock. Right on time, Michael said, adjusting his binoculars. Punctuality was never his strong suit before, but desperation makes people reliable. Tony shook his head. I still think this is going too far, Mike. The guy's an asshole, but nothing. Michael's voice carried the finality that his employees knew meant the discussion was over. He's been asking around about making my accident permanent. He's been planning to steal everything I've worked for, and he's been using my own wife to do it. The third man in the room, Jerry Morrison, no relation to Derek, despite the name, ran the freight yard's security operations and owed Michael for getting his son out of a drug trafficking charge years earlier. "The debt collectors will be here in 20 minutes, Jerry said. "You sure he'll stick around long enough?" "He'll stick around. Derek thinks he's about to solve all his problems with one big score. He's not going anywhere." Michael watched through the binoculars as Derek was greeted by the facility manager and led on a tour of the warehouse operations. The manager, one of Michael's most trusted employees, would keep Derek busy for exactly 15 minutes, just long enough for the next phase to begin. Below in the parking lot, two large men in expensive suits got out of a black Cadillac. Michael recognized them as associates of the company that had purchased Derek's gambling debts. What Derek didn't know was that the debt purchase had included a clause allowing the new owners to call in the full amount at any time, with no payment plan options. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." He ignored it. Over the past week, Linda had sent dozens of messages ranging from angry demands to tearful pleas. She'd discovered that the divorce wasn't going to be the financial windfall she'd anticipated. Her lawyer had explained that business assets protected by corporate structures couldn't be easily divided. The house she'd been planning to keep was in foreclosure. Even her personal accounts were frozen pending resolution of various legal issues. More importantly, she'd realized that Derek wasn't the successful businessman he'd pretended to be. His unemployment, his debts, and his lies had all come to light as their situation deteriorated. The man she'd betrayed her marriage for was worse than useless. He was a liability. "Target's moving," Jerry announced. Through the binoculars, Michael watched Derek emerge from the warehouse, looking pleased with himself. The facility manager shook his hand and pointed toward the parking lot, probably suggesting Derek grab some lunch before their afternoon meeting. Derek strutted toward his BMW, still believing he was in control of his destiny. The debt collectors intercepted him halfway to his car. Michael couldn't hear the conversation from his vantage point, but Derek's body language told the story clearly enough. Confidence became confusion, then shock, then panic as the men explained his new financial reality. The debts he'd been managing with minimum payments and promises were now due in full, $63,000, to be exact, with interest and fees. Derek's gestures became increasingly frantic. He pointed at his car, apparently offering it as collateral, but the men shook their heads. The BMW was leased, not owned, and its value wouldn't even cover the interest on his debts. One of the collectors showed Derek something on his phone, probably photos of what happened to people who defaulted on their obligations. "Phase 2, Michael said, speed dialing a number. Across the parking lot, Derek's phone rang. Michael watched him answer frantically, probably hoping it was Linda with news about the divorce settlement or some other salvation. Instead, it was the leasing company for his BMW, calling to inform him that his lease had been terminated due to non-payment, and they were repossessing the vehicle immediately. A tow truck was already en route. Derek's knees actually buckled. "Now for the grand finale," Michael murmured, making one more call. This time, Derek's phone displayed a number he didn't recognize. But when he answered, he heard Linda's voice, crying, panicked, desperate. "Derek, they arrested me. They say I stole money from the business account, but I was just paying bills like always. I need you to come bail me out. I need." The call ended abruptly, leaving Derek staring at his phone in the parking lot of a freight yard, surrounded by debt collectors, waiting for a tow truck to steal his car. What Derek didn't know was that Linda hadn't been arrested. She'd been served with civil papers for misuse of business funds, a charge that would tie up her assets but wouldn't result in jail time. The crying phone call had been a recording, created using voice samples from her many tearful voicemails to Michael over the past week. Michael watched Derek sink onto the hood of his soon-to-be-repossessed BMW, his head in his hands. A successful marketing executive had been reduced to a broken man in a matter of minutes, and he still had no idea who was orchestrating his destruction. "That's cold, Mike," Tony said quietly. "He wanted to kill me," Michael replied, lowering the binoculars. "He convinced my wife to betray me, mock my injuries, and steal my life's work. And when that wasn't enough, he started planning to make me disappear permanently." He turned to face his brother. Cold doesn't begin to describe what he deserves. Below in the parking lot, the tow truck arrived. Derek tried to argue with the driver, But repossession was a legal process that didn't require the owner's consent. Within minutes, his BMW was hooked up and driving away, leaving Derek stranded with his briefcase and his overwhelming debts. The debt collectors handed him a business card and walked back to their Cadillac. Derek read the card, probably noting the phone number he'd need to call to arrange payment. What he didn't realize was that the number would connect him directly to one of Michael's business associates, who would be very interested in discussing Derek's debt situation. Michael's phone buzzed with another text from Linda. Derek's not answering his phone. Something's wrong. Please, we need to talk. This time, Michael replied, your boyfriend is learning about consequences. You're next. He turned away from the window, satisfied with the day's work. Derek Morrison had been neutralized as a threat and reduced to the pathetic criminal he'd always been. Linda was alone, broke, and beginning to understand the scope of her miscalculations. But Michael wasn't finished. Debt collectors and repossessed cars were just the opening moves in a much larger game. Derek and Linda had declared war on him when they thought he was helpless. Now they were going to learn what happened when you went to war with someone who actually knew how to fight. Chapter 6. The Dominoes Fall. Linda Garrett sat in the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel of her 10-year-old sedan. The only vehicle she had left after Derek's BMW was repossessed, and Michael's truck was reclaimed by the business. She'd been waiting for 3 hours, hoping to catch Michael during his follow-up appointment. But the receptionist had confirmed he'd never scheduled one. Of course he didn't, she whispered to herself. Michael had always been tougher than doctors gave him credit for, and he'd clearly recovered enough to orchestrate the systematic destruction of her life. Her phone rang. Derek's number, finally. Where have you been? She snapped before he could speak. I've been calling for hours. The bank froze my accounts. The lawyer says the divorce is stalled, and… Linda. Derek's voice was hollow, defeated. We need to meet. There's something I have to tell you. They met at a dingy coffee shop near Derek's apartment complex. The kind of place Linda would never have been caught dead in 6 months ago, but her standards had fallen along with her circumstances. Derek looked terrible, his expensive clothes wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. I lost my job, he said without preamble. 3 months ago. I've been lying about everything. Linda stared at him. What do you mean, everything? The marketing firm fired me for stealing client funds. The BMW was leased, and they took it back yesterday. The apartment's being evicted next week because I can't make rent. Derek's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. And the gambling debts, they're not what I told you. How much do you owe? $63,000. Plus interest. And the people I owe it to aren't the kind who accept payment plans. Linda felt the world tilt. The successful businessman she destroyed her marriage for was a fraud, a criminal, a loser who'd been using her for money she didn't actually have access to. You said you were successful. You said we'd have enough money after the divorce to start our new life. I thought your husband was just a trucker with some assets. I didn't realize he was actually wealthy, or that he'd structured everything to protect it from exactly what we were trying to do. You didn't realize. Linda's voice rose, drawing stares from other customers. You convinced me to leave a 20-year marriage for this. You made me betray my husband while he was in the hospital for this. Derek leaned forward desperately. There's more. The debt collectors, they told me something yesterday. They said my debts were purchased by a company called Garrett Holdings. Linda, I think your husband owns my gambling debts now. The coffee shop seemed to spin around Linda. Michael didn't just know about the affair. He was actively orchestrating their destruction. Every financial disaster that had hit them over the past week wasn't coincidence or bad luck. It was warfare. He's been planning this, she whispered. Since the hospital. Since I said. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit what she'd said about parking fees and wishing he would die. It gets worse, Derek continued. The business opportunity one got last week? The consulting contract? It's all connected to companies he owns or controls. He's been watching me, setting me up, probably recording everything I do. Linda's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was one she didn't recognize, but the message made her blood freeze. Meet me at the house. Come alone. It's time to finish this. He wants to meet, she told Derek, showing him the message. Don't go. This is getting dangerous. Maybe we should call the police. And tell them what? That my husband legally moved his own belongings out of his own house. That he legally restructured his business assets. That he legally purchased some gambling debts. Linda laughed bitterly. He's not breaking any laws, Derek. He's just better at this than we are. But even as she said it, Linda was thinking about the Michael she'd married, the quiet, methodical man who'd built a business empire through careful planning and ruthless efficiency. She'd mistaken his gentleness for weakness, his patience for stupidity. Now she was seeing the steel underneath, and it terrified her. Derek grabbed her arm. Linda, I need to tell you something else. Before this all started, I was desperate. The people I owed money to, they wanted it all at once, and I didn't have it. So I asked around about other options. What kind of other options? I asked about making accidents look permanent. About making sure your husband didn't recover from his injuries. Linda jerked away from him. You were planning to kill him? I was scared. I needed the money, and if he didn't survive, you'd inherit everything without a divorce fight. It would have solved all our problems. You sick bastard. Linda stood up, backing away from the table. You were going to murder my husband for money, and you were going to make me an accessory. But I didn't do anything. I just asked some questions. And anyway, the guys I talked to got arrested before anything happened. Linda stared at him, understanding dawning. He knows. Michael knows you were planning to kill him. That's why this isn't just about divorce and assets. He thinks we were trying to murder him. Derek's face went pale. What do we do? Linda looked at her phone, at the message demanding she come to the house alone. Michael wasn't planning to discuss reconciliation or negotiate a settlement. He was planning to end this his way, on his terms, with the thoroughness he brought to every business deal. We run, she said. We get in my car right now, and we drive as far away as we can. We start over somewhere else and hope he doesn't follow. But even as she said it, Linda knew it was too late. Michael had always been a man who finished what he started. He'd spent weeks setting up dominoes, watching them position themselves exactly where he wanted them. Now he was ready to watch them fall. And Linda was beginning to understand that she and Derek weren't just dominoes in his game. They were the target he'd been aiming for all along. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Arrives. The house on Maple Street looked different in the gathering dusk, somehow larger and more imposing than Linda remembered. The for sale sign planted in the front yard was new, along with a notice of foreclosure proceedings that made her stomach clench. 3 weeks ago, this had been her home, her sanctuary, her symbol of middle-class success. Now it felt like walking into a trap. Michael's rental car was already in the driveway. Through the large front window, Linda could see lights on in the living room and a figure moving around inside. She sat in her car for several minutes, trying to gather courage that seemed to have abandoned her entirely. Her phone buzzed with another message. You're late. Don't make me come out there. Linda took a deep breath and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house felt cavernous and strange without furniture. Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as she made her way toward the living room, where Michael sat in the only piece of furniture remaining, his old leather recliner, the one she'd always nagged him to replace because it didn't match the decor. He looked different, not just thinner from the hospital stay, but harder somehow. The gentle lines around his eyes had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. He was wearing dark jeans and a black sweater, and Linda realized she'd never seen him in all black before. It made him look like a stranger. Sit down, he said, gesturing to the floor. Michael, sit down. Linda lowered herself to the hardwood floor, suddenly feeling like a child being disciplined. The power dynamic was unmistakable and intentional. Do you know what I've been doing for the past month? Michael asked conversationally. Learning things. About you, about Derek, about the life you've been living while I was in the hospital. He reached beside his chair and produced a tablet, which he set on the small table between them. The screen showed photographs, Linda entering Derek's apartment, Derek meeting with unsavory characters, text messages between Linda and Derek discussing Michael's assets. 20 years of marriage, Michael continued. 20 years of providing for you, protecting you, building something together. And the moment I'm vulnerable, the moment I can't work or defend myself, you decide I'm not worth a parking fee. Michael, I was upset. I didn't mean. You didn't mean it when you said I should just die? You didn't mean it when you told our daughter we were happier without me? You didn't mean it when you gave your boyfriend information about my business so he could help you steal everything I've worked for? Each question hit Linda like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to deny it, to explain, to somehow justify what she'd done, but the words wouldn't come. Here's what I think happened, Michael said, scrolling through images on the tablet. You got bored. Suburban life with a blue-collar husband wasn't exciting enough anymore. You wanted something more sophisticated, more glamorous. Derek offered you that. Dinners at expensive restaurants, art gallery openings, conversations about culture and refinement. The accuracy of his assessment was devastating. Linda had convinced herself that her affair was about love, about finding her true self, about escaping the limitations of her middle-class existence. Hearing it reduced to such simple terms made her feel pathetic. But Derek wasn't what he seemed, was he? Michael continued. The successful marketing executive was really an unemployed gambling addict with criminal tendencies. The sophisticated gentleman was really a con man looking for a score. And the passionate lover was really a sociopath who asked around about having me killed. I didn't know about that part, Linda said quickly. I swear, I had no idea he was planning anything like that. But you knew he was lying about other things. You knew he was using you. And you went along with it because you wanted what he promised, a life where you didn't have to be married to a trucker. Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where they'd lived for 15 years. The irony is that you never understood what you actually had. You saw a man who worked with his hands and assumed he was simple. You saw someone who drove trucks and thought he was common. You never bothered to learn about the business empire I'd built, the people who owed me favors, the resources I could bring to bear when someone threatened what was mine. He turned back to face her. You treated me like I was disposable, like I was some blue-collar stereotype who would roll over and die when the going got tough. You mocked my condition, celebrated my absence, and planned to profit from my misfortune. I'm sorry, Linda whispered. I know I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But maybe we can work through this. Maybe we can. Work through it. Michael's laugh was cold and humorless. Linda, you wished for my death. You actively worked to steal everything I've built. You betrayed 20 years of marriage for a con man who wanted to murder me for insurance money. What exactly do you think we're going to work through? Linda felt tears starting, but she could see they had no effect on Michael's expression. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you've lost, he said simply. I want you to realize that your choices have consequences. And I want you to know that the man you dismissed as worthless is the one who's going to destroy everything you thought you could steal from him. The front door opened, and Derek walked in, escorted by two large men Linda recognized from Derek's photos as debt collectors. Derek looked even worse than he had at the coffee shop. His clothes were torn, his face was bruised, and his hands were zip-tied behind his back. Sorry we're late, one of the men said to Michael. He tried to run when we picked him up. Made it about 3 blocks. Michael nodded. Put him on the floor next to his girlfriend. Derek was shoved down beside Linda, wincing as he hit the hardwood. Linda, he whispered urgently. Don't believe anything he says. He's crazy. He's been stalking us, manipulating everything. We can get out of this if we... Shut up, Michael said quietly, and Derek immediately fell silent. Linda looked between Michael and Derek, beginning to understand that this wasn't a confrontation or negotiation. This was something else entirely, something final and irreversible. Here's what's going to happen, Michael said, settling back into his chair. You're both going to learn exactly what it costs to betray me, and you're going to learn it the hard way. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. Derek Morrison, Michael said, consulting notes on his tablet like a prosecutor reading charges. Unemployed, gambling addict, thief, con artist, and would-be murderer. He looked up at Derek, who was struggling against his restraints. Did I miss anything? Look, man, I know this looks bad, but it looks bad because it is bad. Michael interrupted. You seduced a married woman for money. You convinced her to betray her husband while he was hospitalized. You gathered intelligence about business assets you planned to steal. And when all that wasn't enough, you started asking around about having me killed. Derek's face had gone pale. I never actually did anything. I just asked some questions when I was desperate. I wasn't really going to. $63,000, Michael said. That's what you owe? Plus interest, plus collection fees, plus penalties for late payment. Want to know what the current total is? One of the debt collectors, a massive man with scarred knuckles, consulted his phone. $87,000 for 100 and change. And Derek, Michael continued, since I now own your debt, I get to decide how it's collected. Standard practice in these situations is to start with fingers, then move on to larger body parts until the debt is satisfied. Linda gasped. Michael, you can't. I can do whatever I want, Michael said without looking at her. Derek here borrowed money from dangerous people and promised to pay it back. When he couldn't pay, he tried to solve the problem by planning my murder. So now he gets to deal with the consequences. Derek was hyperventilating. Please, man, I'll pay you back. I'll get a job. I'll work extra shifts. With what skills? Michael asked. You got fired from your last job for stealing. You have no education, no work history, no references that aren't criminal or fictional. You're a middle-aged con man with gambling debts and a history of theft. Who exactly is going to hire you? Michael stood up and walked over to Derek, crouching down so they were eye to eye. But I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm willing to offer you a payment plan. Derek's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Yes, anything. What do you need me to do? I need you to disappear, Michael said simply. Tonight. Forever. Leave town, change your name, start over somewhere else, and never contact Linda or anyone in this city again. Do that, and I'll consider the debt paid. I can do that, Derek said quickly. I'll leave tonight. You'll never see me again. Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There's one more condition. Before you leave, you're going to tell Linda exactly what kind of man she destroyed her marriage for. All of it. The lies, the theft, the criminal plans. Everything. Derek looked at Linda, then back at Michael. I don't understand. Linda thinks she fell in love with a successful businessman who offered her a better life, Michael explained. She needs to understand that she actually fell in love with a pathetic criminal who was using her as a mark in a con game. So start talking. For the next 20 minutes, Derek confessed. He admitted that he'd been unemployed for months before meeting Linda. He explained how he'd targeted her specifically because he'd researched Michael's business and knew she'd have access to significant assets in a divorce. He described his gambling addiction, his mounting debts, and his increasingly desperate schemes to solve his financial problems. The worst part was his admission about planning Michael's murder. I wasn't going to do it myself, he said, as if that made it better. I was just going to hire some guys to make the hospital accident look worse than it was. Maybe a fall down some stairs, or a problem with his medication. Something that would look like complications from his injuries. Linda was crying now, not just from guilt, but from the devastating realization of how completely she'd been deceived. The man she'd betrayed her marriage for had never loved her. He'd seen her as a business opportunity, nothing more. Why? She whispered. Why me? Derek couldn't meet her eyes. You seemed lonely, unhappy, like you wanted something more exciting than your regular life. Those are the easiest marks. People who think they deserve better than what they have. Michael watched Linda process this revelation with something that might have been pity if he had any left to spare. Do you understand now? He asked her gently. You didn't find love or excitement or a better life. You found a predator who identified your weaknesses and exploited them. Linda nodded, unable to speak. Michael gestured to the debt collectors. Take Derek to the bus station. Put him on the first Greyhound heading out of state. If he's seen in this city again, the debt comes due in full. As Derek was hauled to his feet and dragged toward the door, he called back desperately. Linda, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. But Linda didn't look at him. She was staring at the floor, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd lost and why. When Derek was gone, Michael sat back down in his chair and studied his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, with the dispassionate attention he'd once given to difficult logistics problems. Now, he said, let's talk about your situation. Chapter 9, The Final Verdict. The house fell silent except for Linda's quiet sobbing. Michael let her cry for several minutes, understanding that she was mourning more than just her marriage. She was mourning the person she'd thought she was, the choices she'd thought she was making, and the future she'd thought she was building. 20 years, he said finally. That's how long I loved you. How long I worked to build something for us, to provide security and comfort and a good life. 20 years of putting you and Amy first, of sacrificing my own wants for what our family needed. Linda looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Michael, I know I made terrible mistakes. But maybe. There is no maybe, he interrupted. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't worth a parking fee. You made it again when you told our daughter we were happier without me. And you made it a third time when you gave Derek information to help him steal everything I'd worked for. Michael stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the street where they'd shared so many ordinary moments. Amy learning to ride a bike, Christmas mornings, quiet evenings on the porch. All of it felt like it had happened to different people. Do you want to know what the worst part is? He asked without turning around. It's not the affair. It's not even the theft or the betrayal. It's that you did it while I was helpless. You waited until I was broken and bleeding in a hospital bed, and then you kicked me while I was down. I was confused, Linda said desperately. I was scared about the future, about money, about whether you'd ever fully recover. Derek made everything seem so simple, so easy. Derek was a con man who saw you coming from a mile away, Michael said, turning back to face her. But that doesn't excuse what you did. You're a grown woman who made grown-up choices. Now you get to live with grown-up consequences. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, which he tossed onto the floor beside her. Divorce papers. Already signed by me and filed with the court. You'll find the terms very simple. Linda opened the envelope with shaking hands. As she read, her face grew pale. This gives me nothing. No alimony, no property settlement, no. You get exactly what you contributed to our marriage, Michael said. Which is nothing. The house was purchased with money from my business. The cars were bought with my earnings. The furniture, the jewelry, the investments, all of it came from the company I built before I met you and grew while we were married. But I was your wife. I supported your career. I raised our daughter. You worked part-time at a dental office and spent the rest of your time shopping and complaining about how boring your life was, Michael corrected. Amy raised herself most of the time because you were too busy pursuing your own interests to be much of a mother. Linda stared at the papers. This can't be legal. Wives have rights in a divorce. I can contest this. With what lawyer? Michael asked. You have no money, no assets, and no income. Your accounts are frozen, your credit is destroyed, and any attorney you could afford wouldn't be much help against the legal team I've already hired. He sat back down in his chair, his expression businesslike. But I'm not completely heartless. You can keep your personal clothes and belongings. I've arranged for you to receive a one-time payment of $5,000, enough to rent a small apartment and buy groceries for a few weeks while you figure out how to support yourself. $5,000? Michael, we were married for 20 years. And for 19 of those years, you were a decent wife and partner. The payment reflects the one good year you gave me, minus the 1 year you spent planning to destroy me. Michael's voice remained calm, almost gentle. I think that's more than fair, considering the circumstances. Linda looked around the empty house, the reality of her situation finally sinking in completely. What about Amy? She's still our daughter. Amy made her choice too, Michael said. She told me we were happier without me. She participated in mocking my condition and celebrating my absence. She's 18 now, legally an adult, so she can make her own decisions about her future. You can't cut off your own daughter. I'm not cutting her off. Her college fund still exists, but it's now conditional on her demonstrating genuine remorse for her actions and a commitment to rebuilding our relationship. If she wants to continue having a father, she'll need to earn it. Michael stood up and walked toward the door. Your ride will be here in 10 minutes. A taxi to take you to a motel room I've paid for through the end of the week. After that, you're on your own. Michael, please, Linda called after him. I know I hurt you, but this is too much. You're destroying my entire life over one mistake. He stopped and turned back to her. One mistake? Linda, you spent months planning to betray me. You mocked my injuries while I was fighting to recover. You stole from me while I was helpless. You chose a criminal over the man who'd spent 20 years loving you. That's not one mistake. That's a series of deliberate choices that revealed who you really are. But I love you, she whispered. Michael looked at her for a long moment, and for just an instant, Linda saw a flicker of the man she'd married. Kind, patient, forgiving. Then it was gone. No, he said quietly. You loved what I could provide for you. You loved the security, the comfort, the lifestyle. But you never loved me, because if you had, you never could have done what you did. He walked to the door, then paused. Derek was right about one thing. You did deserve better than what you had. You deserved a husband who wouldn't let you get away with betraying him. You deserved consequences for your actions. You deserve to learn that choices matter and betrayal has a price. Michael, don't do this. Please. We can start over. We can. We already started over, he said. 3 weeks ago, when you decided I wasn't worth a parking fee. This is just the ending you wrote for us. The front door closed behind him with a soft click. leaving Linda alone in the empty house that had once been her home. Through the window, she watched Michael drive away in his rental car, probably heading back to whatever new life he was building without her. She looked down at the divorce papers, at the $5,000 settlement that represented the end of 20 years, at the choices that had seemed so reasonable just months ago. Derek was gone, her marriage was over, her daughter was estranged, and her future was a blank page she'd have to write with her own hands for the first time in decades. Outside, a taxi pulled into the driveway, waiting to take her to a motel room and whatever came after. Linda gathered the few belongings Michael had left her and walked toward the door, finally understanding that some betrayals were too deep to forgive and some prices were too high to negotiate. Michael Garrett had taught her a lesson about consequences that she would carry for the rest of her life. When you betray someone who's helpless, you'd better hope they never get their strength back. Epilogue. 6 months later, Michael Garrett signed the papers finalizing the sale of Garrett Logistics to a major transportation conglomerate. The sale price was enough to retire comfortably, though at 43, retirement wasn't really his plan. He used part of the money to start a new business, a security consulting firm that helped people protect their assets from various threats, including the threat of betrayal by those closest to them. His first client was a successful contractor whose wife had been asking suspicious questions about their business accounts. Amy had reached out twice, both times asking for money for college. Michael had responded each time with the same message. When you're ready to apologize for what you said and meant it, we'll talk about your future. So far, she hadn't taken him up on the offer. Linda had found work as a receptionist at a small insurance office, earning just enough to rent a studio apartment and buy groceries. Derek Morrison had been spotted in Las Vegas 3 months after leaving town, apparently having found new marks to run cons on. Michael had made sure Derek's new victims knew exactly who they were dealing with. Every morning, Michael woke up in his new house, smaller than the old one, but entirely his own, and felt the satisfaction of a man who'd reclaimed his life from people who'd tried to steal it. He'd learned that being ruthless wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about respecting yourself enough to demand that others do the same. And some lessons, Michael knew, were worth teaching no matter what they cost. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.